Something strange happened in Spain that still unsettles people today, and it started with a single message on a quiet corner of the internet. It sounded like a woman trying to steady herself while the ground under her life was shifting. She said she woke up one morning and the world around her wasn't the one she went to sleep in. Her job was different. Her home was different. Her relationships were rewritten. Even her family's memories no longer matched her own. Her name was Lerina Garcia Gordo, and the more she explained what she was living through, the harder it became to dismiss her as confused or attention-seeking. She wasn't selling anything. She wasn't searching for fame. She was asking for help from anyone who had ever felt reality slip in a way that couldn't be explained. The story of the jump doesn't start with a dramatic moment. There was no explosion, no shaking, no bright light. She opened her eyes on a normal morning in March 2008 and instantly noticed something tiny. Her bed sheets weren't the ones she fell asleep on. At first, she brushed it off. People replace linens without thinking twice. But the pattern was unfamiliar. The fabric felt different. That small inconsistency was the first crack. And in memory science, those cracks matter more than people think. The brain treats routine environments like a photograph that gets updated slowly. Your room, your furniture, your closet, your mind stores those details as a stable map. When something that should never change suddenly does, your brain lights up. That's where her shock began. When she got out of bed, her nightshirt wasn't the one she wore the night before. She recognized it, but she didn't remember owning it. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself it might belong to her boyfriend. But even that explanation didn't feel right. She knew her routine. She knew the clothes she slept in. The mismatch felt like a tiny puzzle piece from a different picture. When she stepped into her apartment, the changes multiplied. Items weren't exactly where she remembered putting them. A lamp she bought a week earlier was missing. Clothes she didn't recall buying hung in her closet. Her jewelry box sat in a new spot. None of these things were dramatic individually, but together they formed a pattern that the brain can't easily overlook. Psychologists call this context memory, the system your mind uses to anchor you in your environment. When context shifts, you feel it before you understand it. That's exactly what was happening to her. But she still pushed the thoughts away. She had work. She was running late. And that's when the next inconsistency hit harder than all the others. Her car wasn't where she parked it. She told investigators her car had been parked in a space she hadn't used for months. Not because she forgot, but because that specific spot belonged to an elderly neighbour who guarded it like territory. On her original timeline, the neighbour was very much alive, very much strict, and would leave threatening notes under anyone's wipers if they even thought about parking there. So she avoided it. Everyone avoided it. Yet here her car was, sitting perfectly centered in the old woman's spot, like she had used it every day. The strange part wasn't just that she found her car there, it was that the building's security footage showed her parking it there the night before. Same clothes, same hairstyle, same routine, but she had no memory of doing it. That's what shook her, but that wasn't the only thing waiting for her on that street, because as soon as she opened her car door, another shock was standing across the road. Miguel. To understand why this moment hit her so hard, you have to know the history. Their relationship lasted 7 years. 7 years of shared rent, shared routines, shared plans. She said they met in college, stayed together through early adulthood, and even talked about moving to another city. But long-term relationships collect cracks quietly. She said Miguel was loving at first, then slowly grew more controlling. She brushed it off for a long time because the good moments still outweighed the bad. But over the years, the balance shifted. Arguments got heavier. Silence became their default language. They slept in the same bed, but lived in separate emotional worlds. On her original timeline, the breakup finally happened after a bad fight. She remembered packing a small suitcase, leaving the apartment they shared, and staying with her sister for a week. After that, she got her own place. They blocked each other on social media, stopped talking, and accepted that 7 years were over. But in this version of reality, none of that had ever happened. The moment she saw him standing by the sidewalk, casual, comfortable, like he had every right to be there, her stomach dropped. Because she knew she had broken up with him. She remembered the night she left. She remembered crying in her sister's guest room. She remembered the keys she returned. She remembered it all with perfect clarity. Yet Miguel looked at her with the easy familiarity of a boyfriend who had kissed her goodnight just hours earlier. And here's what made the confusion turn into fear. Miguel behaved exactly like they had never broken up. He walked toward her, asking why she rushed out that morning. He made a comment about their dinner plans. He even mentioned a conversation they supposedly had the night before, one she had absolutely no memory of. She said talking to him felt like acting in a movie where everyone else had the script, but she didn't. And that feeling only got heavier when she pulled into the parking lot of her workplace, because that's where the real shock was waiting. By the time she reached the office, she was already fighting the urge to turn around and go home. Everything felt out of sync. Still, she kept telling herself that work would be the anchor, the one place that could ground her. But the moment she walked through those glass doors, she realized even that hope was misplaced. Normally, she knew exactly how that place worked. It was the kind of corporate environment where everyone understood the unwritten rules. Departments had their territories. The hierarchy was sharp. People guarded their roles because one small shift could shake the entire structure. She'd worked there for 4 years. She knew who handled what, how decisions moved up the chain, and which faces belonged to which offices. This version of the company wasn't. The first thing she noticed was the logo. It was familiar but redesigned the same company name, but with a different font and colour scheme. Corporate doesn't make those changes lightly. A rebrand takes months of planning, meetings, budgets and approvals. She should have heard about it. She should have been part of the internal discussions. But according to the receptionist, the rebrand was 2 years old. That alone hinted at an older point of divergence. Then came the next blow. Her ID badge didn't work. The scanner blinked red over and over. The security guard she talked to every morning stared at her like she was a stranger. She gave him her name, her employee number, even the department she worked in, and nothing matched. Not a single piece of information pulled up a record of her employment. She tried HR next. They didn't recognize her either. They pulled up a directory, typed her name carefully, double-checked spelling, and still came up empty. They even checked older archives. According to this world, she had never worked there. But the moment that cracked everything wide open came when she walked toward her old department anyway, trying to prove she wasn't losing her mind. She said her steps felt heavier the closer she got. And when she reached her team's open office area, she froze. Someone else was sitting in her chair. She tried to explain that this was her desk, but the people around her reacted like she was claiming a stranger's identity. One woman told her that the position she described had been eliminated years ago. Another mentioned that the entire department had been reorganized long before she said she started working there, but she refused to accept that. Something inside her kept saying there had to be an explanation, a merge, a shift, a crossover point that flipped her into a version of her life she never lived. And the deeper she went into that search, the stranger things became. The strange thing about her story is that the universe didn't flip everything upside down. Not every detail was new. Some things stayed so perfectly familiar, they felt like home, and those steady details made the rest of the changes even harder to accept. She said her head was spinning after the chaos at work, so she drove to the one place she always went when she was overwhelmed, her favourite cafe. It was the place she knew better than her own living room. But when she walked in, the place greeted her with a weird mix of comfort and confusion. The inside was exactly as she remembered. The layout, the lighting, the faded stain under table 4 that everyone pretended not to notice. Even the chalkboard menu, with its smudged lettering, looked identical to what she had seen the week before. And then she saw the barista who was famous for getting her order wrong, no matter how simple it was. He was still there, still mixing up cups, still confusing almond milk with oat milk, still smiling awkwardly every time he apologized. She counted on him messing things up. It was almost a tradition. The fact that he greeted her with the same crooked smile and handed her the same incorrect drink felt like someone had pulled one thread out of reality and left the rest perfectly intact. These little consistencies mattered because they pointed to something bigger. The idea that she wasn't in a brand new universe, she was in one that branched off from her own. Multiverse theories describe this kind of thing. They say that if there are parallel worlds, most of them aren't wild opposites. They're close cousins. They share a foundation. The smallest decisions or random events create the split. One version goes left, the other goes right. But everything else stays pretty much the same. But even with all this comforting logic, She said something still felt wrong. The cafe should have grounded her. Instead, it highlighted a bigger question. If some things were identical to her old life, how far did these similarities go? And she didn't have to wait long for the next clue, because the moment she checked her phone, she found the first detail that sent her panic through the roof. When she opened her phone, she expected at least one part of her life to break. A password mismatch, a locked account, anything to confirm that this world wasn't hers. Instead, the opposite happened. Her phone unlocked instantly. If this was a different universe with a different version of her, logic said her accounts shouldn't sync. This version of her should have chosen different passwords, different apps, different digital habits. But every online door opened the same way. That consistency shook her because it meant something deeper than a surface-level match. It meant her private mental patterns, the ones she didn't share with anyone, had carried over perfectly. A hallucinating mind couldn't pull that off. Hallucinations bend reality, but they don't create perfect replicas of digital systems that require exact sequences of letters and symbols. A dream doesn't maintain that kind of precision. If she was simply confused, she would have forgotten at least one password or mistaken one account for another. But she didn't. Everything connected exactly as it should have. But the deeper she went into her phone, the more things twisted again. Her email threads were familiar but off by inches. Some conversations she clearly remembered having were gone. In their place were threads she didn't recall, trips she never took, events she never attended, and plans she supposedly confirmed. Her calendar had entries that didn't match her memory. Some dates were wiped clean, others had reminders she never set. Then she opened her photos, and that's where she found the first sign of a blended timeline. The gallery included everything she remembered: trips with friends, childhood pictures her mother sent, her graduation, even her old selfies she never posted. But mixed in were photos she couldn't explain. Pictures from gatherings she didn't attend, selfies taken in outfits she didn't own, screenshots of conversations that never happened. A few images even showed her standing in places she never visited on her original timeline. The real world around her was shifting in obvious ways, but her phone showed the smaller fractures, the quiet inconsistencies that can't be brushed off as memory lapses. This wasn't a clean swap into a different universe. It looked like someone stitched two timelines together and hoped she wouldn't notice the seams. That theory became even stronger when she got home and checked her closet. Half the clothes matched her memory, the other half didn't. Some of the new outfits weren't even her style. A few still had tags attached from stores she didn't shop at. She also noticed missing items, gifts from friends, a jacket she bought on a trip, the shoes she wore last winter. They didn't vanish in a dramatic way. They simply weren't part of this version of her life. Objects tell stories about the person who owns them. When those stories change, identity changes with them. And she felt that shift in every part of her apartment. Every drawer had a detail that didn't fit. Every shelf told a version of her life she didn't recognize. But all of this, as overwhelming as it was, still wasn't the part that broke her, because the most painful detail wasn't about work or passwords or photos. Up until this point, her story was strange, but it still felt like something that could be debated. A wrong car spot, a wrong job title, a relationship that had somehow rewound itself. All of that could be explained with memory slips, stress, or even a medical condition. But what she described next wasn't the kind of detail you can chalk up to confusion. It was the part that gave her story its emotional weight. The disappearance of a man she claimed she truly loved. His name was Augustine. She said they met about a year after breaking up with Miguel. It happened through mutual friends during a small birthday gathering. She described Augustine as calm, careful with his words, the kind of person who listened before speaking. He had a son from a previous relationship, a quiet kid who loved puzzles and always hid behind his father's leg when meeting new people. She grew close to both of them. That was one of the reasons she left Miguel in her original timeline. Not because of one big fight or betrayal, but because she realized she was staying in a relationship out of habit, not love. Meeting Augustine made that clear. It showed her what she was missing. She described those years with him as peaceful, and that's why this next part hit her the hardest. Because when she went looking for Augustine in this version of the world, everything fell apart. She said she drove to his home a place she had visited so many times she didn't need directions. But the moment she knocked on the door, a stranger answered. He didn't know her. He'd been living there for years. His family moved in before Augustine would have ever lived there in her timeline. The interior of the house didn't match either. The furniture was different. The wall colours were different. Nothing carried even a shadow of the life she remembered. She tried asking about Augustine. The man had never heard the name. She tried describing his son. Again, nothing. At first, she thought maybe Augustine moved. Maybe he sold the house. Maybe he changed cities. But she said she checked every place she could think of. His workplace, his usual shops, his son's school, even the cafe they used to visit together. Every trail ended in silence. This was the moment she realised she couldn't trust anything around her. She couldn't trust her memories. She couldn't trust her senses. She couldn't even trust the timeline she was standing in. And when you reach that point, most people either collapse or cling to whatever logic they can find. She chose the second option. She hired a private investigator. She didn't tell him anything about alternate universes. She told him she was looking for a missing person she had recently lost contact with. She gave the PI everything: Augustine's full name, his son's name, the address she remembered, the places they visited, even the details of his previous job. The investigator promised to dig through public records, employment databases, property logs, school registrations, and anything else that could help. He searched for weeks, and he found nothing. No birth record, no school enrollment, no property records, no driver's license, no past employment, no ID number. Nothing that tied Augustine or his son to any part of this world. But then the investigator mentioned that he kept physical newspaper archives from the last few decades. He liked collecting them. He said they held little details you couldn't always find online, and those archives became the key to the next major discovery in her story. She started with the years she remembered clearly. Elections, local scandals, major news cycles, sports championships, anything with fixed dates in her mind. At first glance, everything looked normal. The layout, the typography, the style of reporting, all familiar. The headlines were similar too. The big events matched: global politics, major disasters, economic milestones. But then she noticed the small discrepancies. A policy she remembered passing in late spring had passed in early summer here. A celebrity who stepped away from acting in her timeline had taken one more film role before retiring. A sports team that lost a final match in her world had tied in this one and lost in a rematch a month later. These weren't dramatic shifts. They were tiny adjustments, like someone nudging a puzzle piece a few millimeters to the left. She kept digging. A local politician she remembered resigning early in the year was still listed as active months later. A new law she remembered sparking outrage didn't appear until a different season. A singer's comeback album was released on a different date. None of this would bother a normal person. Most people don't remember dates to this level of detail. But she insisted she could. She followed news closely. Some events shaped her life decisions, especially during her breakup years. These subtle shifts pointed to a specific concept: convergent timelines. Convergent timelines stay mostly aligned on major points. Wars happen the same year. Elections result in the same winners. Major cultural trends stay recognizable. But the smaller details, the ones based on human behavior, corporate decisions, artistic choices, and administrative processes drift in unpredictable ways. Nothing huge changes because big events require massive forces behind them. But medium and small events, those can swing with one different conversation, one missed appointment, one changed schedule. And that's exactly what she described: a world where history followed the same highway, but took different exits along the way. But the most painful detail hid inside those dates. Because while checking timelines around her past relationships, she found something that made her stop cold. A news event she associated with her breakup with Miguel, something that happened around the same week in her world, was dated much differently here. That meant the emotional timing, the context, the atmosphere she lived through didn't exist in this version of reality. And if that emotional storm never happened, then her breakup might not have happened either. In her world, the breakup was part of a chain reaction that led her to meet Augustine. In this world, the chain reaction never started. She was trapped in a version of reality where the event that pushed her life forward didn't occur, which meant everything that followed simply never took place. Right when she thought the case couldn't twist any further, she opened a door in Miguel's hallway that felt like walking straight into her old life. The moment the hinges swung, she froze. There it was, the exact shaving kit Miguel once kept back when they were together. Same brand, same worn-out zipper, same razor she used to tease him about replacing. Everything sat in the same neat order he always insisted on, as if the years hadn't passed and she'd never left him for someone else. Her heart pulled in two directions at once. Part of her wanted to step back and slam the door shut, afraid of losing the life she believed was still real somewhere else. The life with Augustine. But another part felt Miguel's presence behind every object in the room, almost comforting in its familiarity. She didn't want that tug. She didn't ask for that tug. And she hated that this new reality was forcing her to revisit an emotional world she thought she had buried for good. Miguel noticed the change in her face when she stared at that kit. He didn't understand it, but her expression, her silence, the way her breathing shifted, it made him worry. He reached out, asked if she was okay, and she almost broke. Because how do you explain that the sight of a shaving kit confirms you're living in the wrong version of your own life? She felt like she was standing at the edge of two worlds. One where she'd loved Miguel once and left him. Another where he never stopped being part of her story. And as much as she needed someone to believe her, nobody around her could make sense of what she was saying. Not Miguel, not her friends, not the people who knew her best. They all tried to reassure her, but to her it just sounded like noise. They didn't get it. They couldn't. So she reached for the only option left. The option people choose when everyone else starts looking at them, like they're losing touch with reality. She turned to the experts she never thought she'd need. When she walked into the clinic, she didn't go to prove she was sick. She went because she needed someone with authority to tell her she wasn't losing her grip on reality. She wanted a doctor to look at her brain scans, her blood tests, her entire medical file. The doctors started with the basics: full blood panels, drug screens, toxicology checks for anything that could alter memory or perception. They tested for medications she'd never taken, substances she'd never even heard of. Everything came back clean. Then came the neurological tests, brain imaging, reflex evaluations, memory sequencing tasks. They checked for tumours, inflammation, neural misfires, anything that could interfere with how she encoded memories. She sat through flashing lights, sound pattern tests, and long hours of repetitive tasks designed to map her cognitive pathways. The results were almost frustrating. Every scan showed a healthy, stable brain. That pushed her into the next layer: psychological evaluation. The psychiatrist listened politely as she described two relationships, one of which had vanished from history. They took notes, lots of notes, asking the same questions in different ways to test consistency. They were impressed by her clarity, the steady way she recounted events, the lack of contradictions. But their conclusions weren't what she hoped for. Some suggested dissociation, the kind that comes from emotional overload, where the mind creates escape narratives that feel real. But dissociation usually comes with missing time, fragmented memories, or emotional detachment. She had none of that. Others floated the idea of false memories. The brain is known for filling gaps, especially during stress, using dreams or past emotions. But false memories don't create full, detailed timelines with years of continuity. She remembered birthdays with Augustine, arguments, holiday trips, private jokes, routines. False memories are usually disjointed. Hers moved like a long, coherent film. A few hinted at trauma-linked identity confusion, the type where someone merges memories from different periods to cope. But nothing in her life supported that. There was no trauma severe enough to trigger such a collapse. She pushed back each time, not out of denial, but because none of the explanations fit. She wasn't confused. Her memory wasn't slipping. She wasn't stressed or delusional, or rewriting the past because of guilt. And every test confirmed she wasn't in psychological crisis. The doctors didn't like that answer. When a patient insists the world around them is wrong, the default assumption is that they're struggling internally, not externally. So they wrote down what they believed: stress-induced memory distortion, possible grief reaction, likely emotional hallucination tied to unresolved feelings for Miguel. She rejected all of it. She walked out of the clinic feeling more alone than when she'd walked in. Her case didn't fit any textbook. It didn't fit any diagnosis. It didn't even match known psychological patterns. It was something else entirely. Something the doctors didn't have language for. And that's when the final blow landed, the one thing she never expected to change. She went home looking for comfort, hoping they would ground her. But the moment she stepped through the door, she realized the people she'd known her entire life weren't quite the same. The moment she realized her family didn't match her memories, everything inside her tightened. Up until then, she still had one comfort: the belief that even if the world around her felt shifted, her family would be the one stable thing she could trust. But that idea cracked the second she mentioned her sister's surgery, a memory she held with total certainty, down to the smell of the hospital hallway and the night she slept on the hard plastic chair beside her sister's bed. She brought it up casually at dinner. Her sister laughed at a joke, and she used that moment to ask how she was feeling after the operation. The words barely left her mouth before the table went quiet. Her sister looked at her with total confusion. She said she had never had surgery. She remembered every detail. The pre-surgery fear, the arguments with the doctor when the schedule was delayed, the relief when the procedure ended safely. But now, none of it existed. That single contradiction cracked something deeper. It wasn't Augustine disappearing. It wasn't Miguel reappearing. This was family, the people she had known her whole life. If they said the surgery never happened, then her understanding of her own past was falling apart. This is where the idea of memory anchors hits hard. Memory anchors are the kind of moments that fix a timeline in place. Family emergencies, major medical events, funerals, weddings, these stick in the mind in a way nothing else does. They become reference points, things we compare everything else to. When you remember a hospital waiting room, you don't just recall the event, you recall the whole chapter of life surrounding it. So when one of those anchors goes missing, the world feels rebuilt. Her mother didn't help either. She brought up childhood stories that never happened in her version of the past. Holidays she didn't remember, a family friend she had never met. Even her brother added details that contradicted her memories. A move they supposedly made when she was a teenager. A school trip she never took. A cousin she didn't recognize. She tried asking for photos. Her mother pulled out albums that felt wrong from the moment she touched them. Pictures of events she didn't attend, people she didn't know, vacations she never lived through. The places were familiar, but the arrangements were different. The timeline felt scrambled. If her memories had been wrong, they would have been wrong in vague ways, not in precise, chronological, medically recorded events. She had no reason to invent a hospital visit. Inside her chest, panic mixed with a strange kind of clarity. And once she accepted that possibility, the story broke open wider than she ever expected. Once her case started gaining attention in small online communities, people tried attaching explanations to what she was describing. The first major idea people pointed her toward was quantum decoherence. In simple terms, this is the process where the universe chooses one path out of many possibilities. Quantum particles can exist in multiple states at once, but when they interact with the environment, the options collapse, and reality picks one. The theory suggests that if decoherence can happen on small scales, there may be unknown ways it interacts with larger systems, including consciousness. Some people believe that if something disrupts this process, a person could theoretically end up aware of a timeline that branched differently from the one around them. Then there's the many worlds interpretation, one of the most famous theories in modern physics. According to it, every major decision, every random event, every chance outcome creates new timelines. Not metaphorically, literally, infinite versions of reality, all branching off from every possible choice. So if every version exists, the question becomes, can someone slip into a different branch? A related idea is parallel universe branching, which goes beyond small decisions and looks at larger historical differences. It suggests that while major events tend to remain consistent across branches, wars, elections, global milestones, smaller details can shift. A changed relationship, a missing surgery, a family timeline that doesn't align. Scientists refer to these variations as low-scale divergence. They're big enough to matter personally, but small enough that the universe as a whole still looks the same. This directly mirrors the type of inconsistencies she described. Then there's the popular phenomenon known as the Mandela effect. That's when large groups of people remember something differently from how it appears in the current record. Different spellings, movie lines that never existed, events people swear happened, Researchers debate whether these shared false memories point to collective confusion or to something deeper like tiny shifts between neighbouring realities. But not all explanations depended on physics. Some came from neuroscience. One suggestion doctors leaned on was the neural misfire theory. This idea says that under extreme stress or emotional strain, certain memory pathways can activate incorrectly, creating the illusion of a different sequence of events. The brain is powerful enough to blend old emotions with new experiences, creating a version of the past that feels real, even when it isn't. But this theory didn't match her case. Her memories weren't messy or mixed. They were chronological, detailed and structured, the opposite of misfires. Another theory was fugue states, rare episodes where a person temporarily loses awareness of their identity or past, then recovers without remembering the gap. But fugue states come with confusion afterward, missing time and disorientation. She didn't have any of that. Her memory continuity was perfect from her perspective. She didn't lose days or forget who she was. Her environment changed, not her mind. The last major explanation was memory reconstruction errors. The idea that memories aren't stored as perfect recordings, but are rebuilt each time we recall them. There's truth in that. People often fill gaps without realizing it, but reconstructions don't create entire relationships, multi-year arcs, full histories, or consistent emotional connections. They create small distortions, not fully formed lives with people who no longer exist in the present world. Each theory offered a small piece of the puzzle, but never the full picture. Some explained how the world could shift. Some explained how the mind could shift. None explained why hers shifted while the world around her stayed stable for everyone else. That's when she learned something she never expected. She wasn't alone, not even close. Hundreds, even thousands of people online had posted eerily similar stories, relationships that vanished, family histories that changed, co-workers who never existed, childhood events erased or replaced, different people from different countries with no connection to each other, all describing the same feeling, waking up in a familiar world that didn't fully match the one they remembered. And that's when the mystery deepened. Because if she wasn't the only one, then the explanation wasn't just science or psychology, it was something bigger. One of the most famous cases goes all the way back to 1954, involving a businessman who arrived at Tokyo's Haneda airport carrying a passport from a country no one had ever heard of, Tord. On paper, Tord was supposed to be located between Spain and France. The man insisted it had existed for centuries. He had stamps from previous travels, bank documents from institutions no one recognized, an identification that looked completely legitimate. Japanese officials were baffled. They kept him in a hotel room while they investigated the situation. But by the next morning, he was gone, vanished without a trace, along with every piece of his mysterious documentation. No one ever saw him again. His story became one of the earliest modern examples of what people now call dimensional slips. More recently, online forums have collected what some call parallel city sightings. These are moments where people report seeing towns or buildings that shouldn't exist, visible only for a few seconds before blinking out like a mirage. One of the most well-known stories comes from a man in Liverpool who stepped into a street and found himself in a version of the city that looked decades older. Different storefronts, different cars, people dressed in outdated clothing. After a few minutes of walking in shock, he turned a corner and snapped back to the modern world. He later described it as stepping into a photograph of the past, except everything felt alive. When researchers compare these claims to Lerina's case, several patterns jump out. First, the memories are always coherent. They aren't jumbled. They follow a clear timeline. Second, the changes tend to be personal, not global. History doesn't rewrite itself dramatically. The world doesn't suddenly have different countries or different physics. Instead, the shifts happen in the areas that hit closest to home: relationships, family histories, jobs, and small environmental details. Third, the transitions almost always begin after a moment of intense stress, exhaustion, or emotional strain. It doesn't create the phenomenon, but it seems to be the time when people notice it most clearly. And fourth, the people involved always feel a deep, unsettling certainty that their memories are accurate. The emotional weight is always heavy. Their memories come with full sensory detail, strong feelings, and logical connections. They aren't broken fragments. They're fully built chapters of a life that no longer exists. Compared to all these, stories Lerina's stands out because of the sheer number of specific contradictions she reported. Most people who claim dimensional slips talk about one or two major changes. She described dozens, from her job to her relationships, to her family, to her daily routines. And unlike most people, she documented every detail relentlessly, responding to questions, updating threads, comparing notes with strangers, and cross-checking everything against the world she found herself in. But here's the part that complicates this interpretation. Many of her details remained consistent from the first post to her final online comment. People dealing with fragmented memory often change parts of their story without realizing it. They switch dates, rearrange events, or soften strong claims. Lerina didn't. Her version stayed locked in place for years. That consistency makes it difficult to dismiss her account as a simple psychological distortion. On the other hand, the very fact that she sought validation online, not medical help, raises questions. People who think their timeline changed don't usually call a therapist. They call strangers who might have experienced something similar. That behavior aligns more with emotional confusion than with an external shift in reality. She wasn't trying to solve a scientific mystery. She was trying to feel grounded again. And that's where the psychological theory struggles. Some of her details support it, some challenge it. Her certainty fits both interpretations. Her confusion fits both. Her disappearance fits both. It's a case that refuses to collapse into one clean explanation.